There comes a moment when a man stops fighting, stops reaching out, stops trying to make someone stay. He withdraws quietly, no blame, no pleading, and in that silence, something strange begins to happen. The woman starts to feel empty, not because she lost love, but because she lost what she had silently controlled: attention. In the early days, she carries on as usual. She smiles, posts photos, acts as if nothing happened. But within, questions start to rise. What is he thinking? Why is he so silent? She begins checking her phone more often, liking his posts in silence, sending vague messages, not to return, just to see, does he still react? And if he doesn't respond, if he remains silent, the truth surfaces. He no longer needs her, and that, more than anything, is what she cannot bear. 1. Withdrawal is not escape. It is a declaration. In matters of the heart, when a man chooses to leave a relationship without argument, without anger, and without the need for lengthy explanation, he is often misunderstood. Outsiders may see him as running from responsibility, afraid of emotion, or simply weak. Yet from the Stoic point of view, a quiet withdrawal is no sign of defeat. It is an unspoken yet powerful declaration. I am no longer governed by your emotions, and I refuse to let my own lead me into what is unworthy. Stoicism does not promote coldness or detachment. On the contrary, it demands a soul strong enough to feel deeply, yet remain unmoved by what it cannot control. A man walks away not because he feels nothing, but because he understands that there are boundaries that must never be crossed, such as self-respect, inner peace, and personal worth. When a relationship trespasses those lines, walking away is the only act left to preserve what is sacred: oneself. What makes this withdrawal a declaration is that it is not born of impulse or vengeance. It does not arise from wounds left untreated, but from reflection, from the ability to see things clearly and recognize this. We cannot change others, but we can change our response. In the Stoic mind, what lies beyond our control, others' actions, emotions, intentions, should never consume our energy. And so, the man walks away not because he does not care, but because he has stopped trying to control what is not his. This is an act that demands courage. Most people seek validation from the outside to quiet the insecurities within. We crave response, explanations, or hope that the other person will somehow understand how we feel. But Stoicism teaches that suffering begins exactly there, when we entrust our peace to someone else's behavior. To withdraw, then, is to say, I don't need you to confirm my worth. I already possess it. That act is not loud, not preachy, and it asks for no change in the other. It is simply a step away, quiet but firm. There is nothing more admirable than a man who chooses calm over chaos, clarity over guessing games, dignity over pleading for affection. In a world that glorifies drama and calls emotional chaos love, such composed withdrawal is a direct blow to that illusion. Women, or anyone on the other side, may not understand this at first. To them, the man walking away may appear as one unwilling to fight for the relationship. But over time, the silence he leaves behind becomes a mirror, forcing the other to face themselves. With no one left to blame, no one left to control, they are made to confront their own emotions and inner wounds. In that moment, the withdrawal becomes more than a personal declaration. It becomes a turning point in the emotional growth of the one left behind. The key is this: not everyone who leaves is giving up. Those who flee are the ones who cannot bear to look back. They leave in anger, in hurt, or in manipulation. But the Stoic man leaves when he sees clearly, when there is nothing left to hold on to. and nothing left to resent. He knows that what truly matters never needs to be chased, and self-respect never lies in someone else's hands. Withdrawal becomes a declaration when it is led not by emotion, but by principle. It is not a tactic to provoke guilt, to manipulate, or to win someone back. He withdraws because he understands that his presence must have meaning, and when it is no longer valued, staying becomes self-betrayal and a distortion of the values he holds. Such a man does not need to shout, "I am worthy." His composure speaks for itself. From a societal point of view, this goes against many traditional norms. Men are taught to be strong, to fight for the one they love, to hold on to her at all costs. But Stoicism does not teach us to be warriors in battles that don't matter. It teaches us to discern between battlegrounds and wasted energy. And sometimes, the greatest courage is not in staying and enduring, but in walking away with serenity, leaving no scar behind. Withdrawal is not about asserting moral or spiritual superiority. It is not a tool to prove I'm better than you, or I've awakened. The Stoic man does not withdraw to win. He withdraws because the game no longer interests him. He understands that every person walks their own path, and the only thing he can govern is his own actions and mind. There is no need to sever ties in bitterness, nor to utter a final word to claim position. A truly self-possessed man needs only one act: to walk away. And in that withdrawal lies a transformation. He is not merely leaving a person. He is leaving behind an older version of himself, the one who depended, who sought validation, who struggled in vain to be loved the right way. Withdrawal, in its deepest sense, is a rebirth. It is not escape, but redefinition. He is no longer one ruled by the hope of being accepted, but one who lives in alignment with his values, whether they are seen or unseen by others. Some will ask, but if he still loves, why would he leave? The answer is simple: because love should not cost you yourself. Stoicism does not call us to suppress emotion. It calls us to place it properly. Love that compromises dignity is no longer love. It becomes dependence, and any relationship that disturbs inner peace is one worth walking away from. Withdrawal is not an ending. It is a choice made with intention, awareness, and dignity. That man does not disappear. He remains, present in peace, in self-mastery, and in a strength no one can take away. 2. Emotional reaction of the one left behind, the reversal of power. When a man suddenly ceases all pursuit, no more messages, no more calls, no more attempts to connect, the woman's initial reaction is often not outwardly visible. Instead of showing shock, sadness, or insecurity, she projects indifference, as if none of it affects her. This indifference does not reflect her inner world. It is a mask, worn to protect the ego and preserve a curated image, especially in today's social landscape, where platforms act as stages for emotional performance. In the early phase, she continues to post smiling photos, share daily moments, even go out of her way to portray a life happier than ever. The goal isn't authenticity. It's to send an indirect message: I'm fine. Your absence means nothing. And yet, the very effort to convey that message betrays the unrest within. In truth, when the Stoic man withdraws, he leaves behind no anger, no conflict. This absence of tension offers nothing for the other to hold on to, no emotional foothold from which to lash out or push back. His calm becomes a kind of echo that unsettles. She feels unmoored, unable to grasp what is unfolding in his mind. And because no clear signal comes from him, she begins to feel helpless in the face of a silence that appears harmless, yet carries immense weight. In that state, she tends to check his social media more often, engage with older posts, or send vague messages like, "Hey," or "How have you been?" Not to reconnect sincerely, but to test for a response. If the man replies, she feels as though control is regained. But if he remains silent, something within her begins to crack. The truth is, many women have never had to face consistent, unyielding indifference or rejection, while men grow accustomed to this early on. Being ignored, turned down, ghosted without explanation. Women are more often in the position of being pursued. So when the roles reverse, the insecurity intensifies, and in those moments, the mask of indifference begins to fracture. Beneath the surface of "I don't care" lies a string of quiet questions. Why doesn't he want me anymore? What did I do wrong? Has he found someone else? These questions do not arise from pure love, but from the disorientation of losing emotional leverage. At this point, the man is no longer just a romantic figure. He becomes a symbol of what she can no longer control. This marks the first shift in the emotional power dynamic, because once the woman begins to crave his attention again, the roles within the relationship subtly invert. She is no longer the one being pursued, but has moved into a passive, observing state, the very position the man once occupied. And it all began with the illusion called "I'm fine." After the initial phase of masking emotion with outward detachment, the woman enters a state of internal disorientation. When the man continues his silence, no replies, no signs, not even the faintest return, this lack of input leaves her unable to predict what comes next. Where once she was accustomed to him initiating, texting, calling, expressing affection, or at the very least responding, now all such familiar signals have vanished. It is the prolonged silence, lacking any confirmation or rejection, that places the mind in limbo. There is no clarity, no closure, but also no continuation. This is a psychologically wounding state, because it does not allow the one left behind to move forward or retreat completely. She does not know whether to hold on to hope or to let go. And it is precisely this ambiguity that creates more emotional turmoil than a direct breakup ever could. Silence, in this case, is not merely the absence of response. It becomes a silent message of overwhelming weight. For the Stoic man, it is an expression of self-mastery, a deliberate choice not to be pulled into emotional games. But for the woman left behind, that silence becomes an invisible wall, where all attempts to reconnect fall flat. She begins to feel she has lost her voice in the relationship, lost the ability to influence, and ultimately, lost her sense of authorship over the emotional narrative. There is nothing more disempowering than the inability to provoke a response. When every message is ignored, every gesture goes unanswered, and every probe is met with utter stillness, an emotional crisis begins to unfold. At that point, she no longer focuses on the relationship itself, but on deeper questions. Why won't he react? Do I still mean anything to him? These questions have no clear answers, which only prolongs and deepens the feeling of helplessness. When one feels a loss of control, the instinct for self-preservation begins to wane. The woman may feel angry, or conversely, sink into passivity, exhausted from endless guessing. She may start blaming herself, doubting her worth, or believing she simply wasn't enough. Or perhaps she rationalizes it, imagining he's playing games, punishing her, or using strategy. But all of these are merely attempts to reclaim a sense of control. In reality, she no longer holds it. At this stage, the reversal of emotional power is no longer implied. It is evident. In any relationship, the one who maintains composure and command over their behavior holds the stronger position. When the man does not respond to emotional probing or provocation, the one left behind has no choice but to face the void that cannot be filled with anger, nor soothed with denial. Silence, when born from inner self-discipline, becomes a symbol of shifting power in the relationship. And it is into this process that the woman begins to realize the security she once found in control has vanished, and no one took it from her, but the dependency she failed to notice from the start. When a man chooses to withdraw in silence, with no bitterness, no demand for validation or explanation, a psychological shift occurs. The emotional position within the relationship is reversed. The woman, once the one being pursued, now finds herself alone in the search for answers. From a place of control, she drifts into a reactive state, watching, waiting, responding to a presence that is now deliberately absent. This change doesn't happen suddenly. At first, she simply checks his social media just to see how he's living without her. Then her actions shift to indirect engagement, liking a photo, viewing a story, commenting on a random post, all meant to trigger a reaction. These are her ways of testing whether her presence, even indirectly, still holds influence. However, when none of these gestures earn a response, the need to be noticed becomes a more urgent desire. The woman, once accustomed to receiving attention, now finds herself in uncertainty, and uncertainty often leads to actively seeking what was lost. She may begin to text again, bring up shared memories, or pretend nothing happened, just to revive familiarity. But these actions no longer come from a place of strength. They stem from fear of being forgotten. The critical point is this: the very act of pursuing someone who once pursued her causes emotional conflict. On one hand, she resists admitting she is now in the weaker position. On the other, she cannot deny being drawn in by the absence. And here, the reversal of emotional power completes itself. The one who was once chosen now tries to be chosen again. Unlike relationships where both parties interact to maintain balances, in this case, violence becomes the force that defines the scale. The man takes no action, yet controls the entire emotional dynamic through his calm. He needs neither rejection nor affirmation. It is his inaction that causes the others to wait and wonder. Over time, the woman may feel disappointed in herself for reaching out and being met with silence. But rather than retreat, she tends to double down, because the question is no longer, should I continue? But why isn't it like before? And in that moment, she resumes the pursuit, not to reclaim love, but to reclaim the feeling of once having held power. 3. You do not stay silent to manipulate, but to live in alignment with your values. In modern relationships, especially during conflict, silence is often misinterpreted as a tool for emotional manipulation. People call it the silent treatment, ghosting, or psychological warfare, tactics meant to apply pressure and provoke a response. Yet when viewed through the lens of Stoic philosophy, a clear distinction emerges. Silence is not a means to control others, but a truthful reflection of an inner state that has found its stability. A man who chooses to withdraw calmly, without blame or elaborate explanations, does not do so to confuse or guilt the other. The motive behind this action is not to regulate another's emotions, but to remain aligned with his personal principles. For the Stoic practitioner, the goal is not to win an argument or capture attention, but to live by one rule: never react impulsively, and never sacrifice inner peace for what lies beyond one's control. Such silence, then, is not strategic. It is not a calculated move in the game of love. It is a choice born of clarity. When a relationship turns toxic, when conversation no longer rests on mutual respect, continuing to speak serves no purpose. In such moments, silence becomes the most appropriate response, not to punish, but to end the cycle that disturbs one's inner order. The other party may misinterpret this silence believing it to be evasion or retaliation. But in truth, the silent one has reached a place where words are no longer needed to assert the self. He requires no validation, no effort to be understood, for the understanding has already come from within, not from external feedback. In this case, silence becomes the declaration of someone who has grasped his boundaries, his values, and the peace he chooses to protect. In most emotional conflicts, reaction is the first impulse. It comes in many forms: anger, justification, tears, attempts at clarity, or pleading. All are instinctual defenses meant to preserve the ego and sustain connection. Yet in these charged moments, we are most likely to lose control and allow others to dictate the narrative. The Stoic response, to not react, is a conscious act to prevent being ruled by external triggers. Someone who maintains silence amid provocation, conflict, or emotional distance is not apathetic. They understand a fundamental truth: the more we react, the more we are controlled. When a word, a gesture, or an emotional display from another instantly compels us to respond, we've already surrendered the reins of our emotional governance. At that point, someone else can shape our behavior without lifting a finger. Refusing to react does not mean denying emotion. It does not mean ignoring reality or suppressing what one feels. On the contrary, it is the mark of awareness, a capacity to step back from the immediate surge of emotion and see things through a more objective lens. In Stoic philosophy, this is known as empathia, a state of complete self-command in the face of external forces. A Stoic learns to observe emotions, acknowledge them, but not allow them to dictate behavior. In the context of relationships, where emotions often fluctuate and reaction is seen as a sign of care or self-assertion, the absence of a response is easily mistaken for indifference or coldness. However, silence rooted in inner strength is not avoidance. It is a refusal to engage in emotional games that no longer serve the true value of a relationship. This is not emotional detachment. It is a clear boundary. I do not allow someone else's behavior to dictate my own. Choosing not to react in situations that easily provoke is also a way of protecting one's energy and inner peace. When someone no longer desires to win arguments, no longer needs to prove right or wrong, and feels no urge to justify themselves, they have freed themselves from emotional dependency. That self-mastery renders provocation and manipulation powerless, because there is no reaction left to feed them. The act of refusing to react is therefore a deliberate way to sever the chain of emotional control from the outside. The one who remains calm in chaos is not only in command of himself, but has also disarmed others' attempts at control. And that is one of the clearest expressions of inner freedom in human interactions, especially romantic ones. Emotional reaction is often seen as natural. When feeling hurt, dismissed, or abandoned, people tend to respond immediately through words, actions, or intense emotions. Yet from the perspective of someone who pursues inner mastery, the moment of immediate reaction is also when one is most easily manipulated. In Stoic philosophy, emotions are not denied, but they are not granted authority over action. When another's behavior triggers anger, disappointment, or the urge to retaliate, it places us in a reactive posture. At that point, emotion ceases to be a private experience and becomes a lever for others to influence our behavior. Whoever can cause us to lose control with a word, a gesture, or a silence holds emotional power over us. To refuse to react is to reclaim that power. When someone chooses silence or neutrality in the face of provocation, They are making a clear statement. I do not let emotion dictate my decisions. This action does not arise from pride or coldness, but from the awareness that what lies beyond our control, like others' attitudes, emotions, or intentions, does not deserve our mental energy. In relationships, especially after conflict or separation, silence can become either a wall of separation or a space for healing. However, when viewed from the outside, that silence is often misinterpreted. The other person may believe the silence is part of a cold war, a tactic to wound, or a tool of manipulation. But for someone grounded in inner clarity, not responding is not a game. It is a refusal to participate in an emotional cycle that no longer holds meaning. One point must be made clear. Refusing to react does not mean becoming emotionally numb. A Stoic practitioner does not turn into a machine devoid of feeling. They still experience sorrow, disappointment, and waste, but they choose to process it internally, rather than through impulsive reaction. It is a process of self-examination, of recognizing emotion without allowing it to dictate action. This awareness protects them from the fallout of rash decisions, choices that often harm both sides and push the relationship into chaos. Not reacting is also a way to shield oneself from emotional games, where people act not in truth, but out of a desire to gain attention, assert dominance, or secure their role within the relationship. When someone maintains boundaries, avoids pointless arguments, resists lengthy explanations or endless rebuttals, they are stepping out of the cycle of emotional dependency. And that act, though quiet, is the most powerful declaration of all. I am no longer governed by anyone but myself. Conversely, if one continues to react to every behavior of the other, they surrender agency over their own inner life. Each triggered response becomes proof that their emotions no longer belong to them. Therefore, to stop, to refrain from retaliation, justification, or rebuttal is not weakness. It is the refusal to be led by the need for validation or the urge to change another. It is the mark of an inner life that is free. When there is no longer a reaction, external attempts at manipulation lose their power. For all control requires one thing: a response. Without it, the chain of control is broken, and the one who remains silent, calm, and true to their values becomes the only person still standing amid the storm. 4. The void, a mirror that reflects the truth. When a man decides to withdraw from a relationship without lengthy explanation or negative action, his once familiar presence disappears entirely. This creates a profound void in the mind of the one left behind. Not merely the absence of a person, but the disappearance of the familiar responses, a message, a check-in, an effort to reconnect. This void, though formless in appearance, leaves a distinct imprint on the inner experience. In the beginning, this emptiness is often dismissed. The one who remains may believe it's just a temporary silence, a short-lived distance between two people. However, as time passes and the silence persists, perception begins to shift. With no signals from the other, the mind is forced inward, leading to questions never asked before. Questions like, did I truly appreciate that person? How did I behave in that relationship? And deeper still, without that person, am I still my thief? Begin to arise naturally. This process of self-reflection does not occur immediately. It unfolds step by step, beginning with a sense of loss, followed by doubt, and eventually, self-inquiry. When there's no one to reflect emotions back or share the rhythms of daily life, one starts to notice gaps within their own awareness and emotional life. The man's former presence, though gone, becomes an invisible measure by which the one left behind begins to compare, reflect, and examine themselves. The greatest difference between an ordinary physical absence and the void left by silent withdrawal is this: it contains no drama, no heavy farewell, no emotional climax to mark the end. This lack of conclusion leaves the internal process uninterrupted. It forces the one remaining to seek answers within, rather than wait for them from someone who has already departed. This leads to a distinct form of self-awareness, where one confronts themselves instead of placing blame or seeking escape. Furthermore, the absence of someone who was calm, non-reactive, and uninterested in seeking attention creates a very different kind of silence, with no emotional games to engage in and no one left to assign blame. The one left behind begins to feel isolated within their own inner world. At this point, the void is no longer simply about missing a person. It becomes the space in which one is compelled to stop and reevaluate the entire emotional journey. That state, though uncomfortable, is the ideal condition for inner transformation, because in silence, in the absence of external reactions, one has no choice but to turn inward in search of meaning. And it is then that truth begins to emerge, not through the words of the other, but through what the one left behind discovers when they confront a loneliness that cannot be masked by outward appearance. That void, when seen clearly, is no longer a punishment. It becomes a light that illuminates the blind spots of perception, dismantles illusions built by bias, and ultimately fosters growth. On this path, absence turns out to be the strongest reminder. Sometimes it is the disappearance of another that finally allows us to see ourselves. In many relationships, especially tense or imbalanced ones, blaming the other often becomes a defense mechanism. During conflict, people tend to assign responsibility to the other. They didn't care enough. They were too cold, too controlling, or failed to understand one's emotions. This reaction not only eases personal guilt, but also helps preserve a favorable self-image in one's own mind. However, when a man withdraws calmly and resolutely, without complaint or negative behavior, that traditional mechanism of blame begins to lose its effect. When someone walks away in silence, without reaction, and without leaving behind the traces of conflict, the person left behind finds it difficult to construct a narrative that protects their ego. With no argument, no visible harm, no clear wrongdoing to point to, the woman remaining begins to lack the framework to interpret the event in a way that favors her. That very absence forces her to return to the only path left: self-examination. When blame can no longer be placed on the one who has left, the mind begins to shift its focus inward. Questions once ignored or avoided now return with greater intensity. Did I truly listen to him? Was I too controlling? Did I lose something without realizing it? These questions no longer serve to justify, but mark the beginning of a process of personal inquiry and confrontation with the unseen corners of one's own behavior and perception. At this stage, the truth begins to surface, not from the actions of the other, but from the process of self-reflection that the one left behind initiates. In the absence of someone who was once steady and calm, she begins to see the extent of emotional dependence she once had, the level of control she believed to be normal, or the expectations she unknowingly imposed. The void he leaves behind is no longer a surface absence. It becomes a mirror reflecting the emotionally unripe aspects of her own self. The unveiling of this truth does not come gently. It often arrives accompanied by internal resistance. The one left behind may pass through stages of denial, anger, or disappointment before accepting that what they once held as truth may have been merely a narrow perspective. But once that barrier is crossed, this process opens space for genuine understanding and transformation. And within that space, the relationship, even though it has ended, continues to serve as a vital lesson in the emotional maturation of the one who remained. Additionally, the absence of someone to blame creates a unique phenomenon, a reevaluation of the person who withdrew. When negative justifications can no longer be sustained, the one left behind tends to see the other with greater honesty, no longer through the lens of anger or hurt, but through a clearer understanding of his actions, his posture, and his choice to remain silent. From that ceases respect may emerge, not because he tried to reclaim his place, but because he remained true to his values in silence. When someone is no longer present to serve as a counterpart in the dialogue, the truth can no longer be deflected or obscured. It must show itself, because there is no one else left to blame, no one left to hide behind. And that is the beginning of real inner transformation. When a man withdraws from a relationship in silence and composure, what he leaves behind is not surface-level chaos or harm, but a deep void. This void is not located in physical absence, but in the loss of a once familiar emotional anchor. A man who was steady, unshaken, and who did not respond according to emotional expectations. What's notable is that this void cannot be quickly replaced or filled with someone else or with activity. Many attempt to fill that void with busyness, new relationships, or curated self-expression on social media. These tools act as emotional anesthetics, giving the illusion that life goes on and everything is still under control. Yet the effectiveness of such tools is only temporary. They never touch the root of the emptiness, an emptiness created not by a specific individual, but by the absence of a consistent, unshakable presence that refused to be governed by emotional demand. Over time, the one left behind will realize that regardless of environment changes, new connections, or efforts to fill the space through different means, the void remains, because it was never about lacking someone to care. It was about lacking a specific kind of presence, the presence of one who seeks no validation, who cannot be baited by emotion, and who knows when to walk away. That calm, once experienced, becomes an invisible standard, one few others can match. This void, therefore, cannot be removed. It cannot be moved past in the conventional sense. The only possible response is to face it, to confront the loneliness, not born of a lack of affection, but of the absence of the safety that once existed in his silence. And in that confrontation, the one left behind is forced to accept one truth: there are losses that cannot be replaced, only understood and carried forward with a new awareness. In my personal journey, I've experienced moments very similar to what we've just explored: a strained relationship, endless days of waiting for a response, and the desperate urge to do something to salvage it all. But then I realized, the more I reacted, the more I lost myself. Every action, whether silence or speech, if rooted in the fear of being forgotten or the hunger for validation, is a sign of emotional dependency. Since adopting Stoic thinking in my life, I've begun to change how I show up in relationships. I no longer stay silent to see how they'll respond, but to create space to listen to myself. I've also learned not to respond immediately to criticism or coldness, not because I'm noble, but because I understand this. The only thing I truly control is my own reaction. Stoicism doesn't teach us to become unfeeling. It teaches us when to speak, when to walk away, and when to choose silence as a form of respect, not just for others, but for ourselves. In everyday life, this isn't easy, but every time I resist the urge to react impulsively, I feel stronger, not toward others, but within myself. If what you heard today made you reflect more deeply on how you live and love, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss future content. This isn't just a YouTube channel. It's a shared journey of building resilient inner lives, because sometimes the way you walk away, quietly but with certainty, is the most powerful statement of who you've truly been. I'll see you in the next video.